In 1984, I was ready to break out and expand my bike touring adventures. Till then, my bike tours have been short, relatively tame, and close to home. I looked at a map of the USA, and the Pacific Coast in California looked pretty cool to me. So I made a plan. I packed my gear, I boxed my bike, and I boarded a plane for Los Angeles, California. This is the story of my 1984 ride up the Pacific Coast Highway in California. So I landed in LAX, I got off the plane, I found my bike box, and I reassembled my bike right there on the sidewalk in front of the airport. Then I headed straight for the beach. My plan was to ride the California coast, the Pacific Coast Highway, and then continue up into Oregon. I started in LA and I went north. Little did I know, this was a big mistake. Turns out that on the west coast of America, the wind blows, no, it howls out of the north all summer long. As is often the case, I learned the hard way. I'm not a city person, and LA's pretty crowded, so I was pretty eager to get out of there. This was my first time in Southern California on my own, and I didn't want to accidentally end up in the hood, if you know what I mean. Once I hit Venice Beach, I headed towards Santa Monica. There was a paved bike path along the beach, crowded with all kinds of people. There were bodybuilders, roller skaters, hikers, and even cyclists. I went through Malibu, where the movie stars live, but I didn't see any movie stars. For my first night in Southern California, I camped out on McGrath Beach with the song Ventura Highway running through my head. Between Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo, there's an interesting mixture of luxury and agriculture. Riding through the town of Guadalupe, I felt like I was in old Mexico. I kept going and stayed at a campground in Morro Bay. Morro Rock is a prominent seashore formation that you just can't miss. In my opinion, the Pacific Coast Highway is the most scenic stretch of road in America. And the rugged coastal section near Big Sur is the best part. The scenery on the coast was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The engineers and construction workers that built this road had their work cut out for them. The road hugs the mountainous coastline. On the one side, the hill goes straight up into the mountains. On the other side, it goes straight down into the ocean. The Pacific Ocean here is the most amazing blue color, stretching west all the way to the horizon. I can see how sailors fall in love with the sea. Every river or stream cuts a deep gorge into the coastline on its way to the sea. Each gorge is crossed by a bridge that's a combination of brilliant engineering and artistic design. Actually, each bridge is an amazing work of art. Each one's a unique sculpture. Of course, I made a lot of stops along the way and took lots of pictures. At one stop, I thought I heard dogs barking. I looked down at the ocean and saw a small stretch of beach, and there was a gathering of sea lions called a raft. So a raft of sea lions was down there, just barking and basking on the beach. Monterey Bay is world famous for its diversity of marine wildlife. Hang out on the beach, and you'll probably see more than just sea lions. You'll see harbor seals, sea otters, dolphins, and maybe even some whales. In the tide pools, look for some marine invertebrates, like sea stars and sea anemones. By day 6, I rode into San Francisco, the city by the bay. My parents loved coming to this town. There's so much to see and do here. I'd only heard stories and seen pictures, but the hills here and the neighborhoods were crazy steep. I had to crank up the hills 1 block at a time. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I made it to Golden Gate Park, right there next to the bay. There was an awesome view of the Golden Gate Bridge. There were people everywhere, enjoying their day in the park. That's where I met this young couple, Kip and Ann. They're from San Francisco. We struck up a conversation, and I spent the whole rest of my day with them. They were very cool. They showed me all over town. They gave me the grand tour. They even let me stay in their home. San Francisco is a beautiful city, and I can see why my parents fell in love with it. My hosts took me to Twin Peaks for an incredible view of the city. They took me to Lombard Street, the crookedest street in the world, a real San Francisco icon. The neighborhood near Haight and Ashbury was hippie central back in 1967. Remember, the summer of love? I was like 3. The next day, I got up extra early, and while the city was still asleep, I crossed the Golden Gate Bridge and into Marin County. I rode through Sausalito on my way to Point Reyes. This is earthquake country. The San Andreas Fault runs right under your feet. I was now officially in Northern California. The many state parks along the California coast are breathtaking, and they're very biker friendly. They always set aside a hiker-biker campsite. Anyone that comes into the park on bike or on foot can camp at the hiker-biker site for cheap. In 1984, I think it cost like $1. The only catch was you had to share that site with every hiker or biker that came into the park that day, and you were always guaranteed to meet some interesting people. Like Yoshi from Japan. He didn't speak a word of English, and his bike weighed a ton. But that didn't stop him from having a California coast adventure. I also met Renato. Renato was an experienced bike tourist. He was from San Francisco, and he had plans to ride to Missoula, Montana, and then to Alaska. And that's when I learned about a group called Bike Centennial, which later became the Adventure Cycling Association. We were riding in the same direction, at least for now, so we decided to ride together for a while. Actually, we rode together for the next 11 days. After riding solo for so long, it was kind of nice to have a riding partner. There are some amazing places along the California coast. This is just one of those crazy switchbacks on the Pacific Coast Highway. The riders coming south warned us about Leggett Hill. They said it was notorious for crazy logging truck drivers that didn't care much for bicyclists. Good to know. Northern California is home to the coastal redwoods, Sequoia sempervirens. They grow taller, but not as big around as their inland cousin, Sequoiadendron giganteum. They're found in the Sierra Mountains. Some of these coastal redwoods can grow over 300 feet tall. Crazy. That's like a football field standing on one end. In any case, these trees are impressive. About 98% of the original redwood trees have been cleared. The remaining 2% grow in protected groves in the Redwood National Park and some state parks here along the northern coast. One of the best concentrations of coastal redwoods here in Northern California is a 33-mile stretch of road called the Avenue of the Giants. It goes right through the heart of the coastal redwoods. There's nothing cooler than spending the night camped out in a grove of redwoods. There's also a thriving population of Roosevelt elk in the park. The Pacific Coast Highway continues into Oregon. I didn't have any specific plan, so I just decided to stick with Renato for a while. He was on his way to Missoula. We rode through Coos Bay and then into Reedsport. We turned east there, left the coast, and headed toward the mountains. We followed the Smith River and then over the coastal range into Eugene. This was just a warm-up for more mountains to come. The next day, we left Eugene real early. with our sights set on the Cascade Mountains and Mackenzie Pass. When we turned onto the road that led up to Mackenzie Pass, there was a sign there that said "Road Closed, Snow Barricade," so that was a little concerning. Our other choice was to take the detour and go over Sandy M Pass to the north, but that was way out of the way. So we opted for Mackenzie Pass and headed up the closed road. I thought, no big deal, I'll just push my bike around the snow barricade and keep going. Besides, there were lava fields and a really cool observatory up on Mackenzie Pass that I wanted to see. And since the road was closed, there'd be no cars. So we headed up Mackenzie Pass. It was cold and foggy with a light rain. I stayed warm by pedaling uphill. The road was steep with lots of switchbacks. As we gained elevation, it got colder and foggier, and I started noticing piles of snow on the side of the road. The rain started to freeze, and the piles of snow turned into a thick blanket of snow. I don't live near the mountains, so I thought this was pretty cool. Snow up in the high country in the middle of summer. We must be near the top. Then, as I was riding, I looked to the left, and I noticed a snow plow on the side of the road buried in a pile of snow. I thought to myself, that can't be good. And then the road ended. We got to the place where they stopped plowing the road. Oh, there was more than a snow barricade. It was a thick blanket of snow for who knows how far. It was decision time. Should we keep going or turn around and take Sandy M Pass? Well, I was cold, and the thought of hypothermia was crossing my mind. There was only one way, keep moving forward. So I changed my socks and snapped a quick picture of my bike. I threw my bike over my right shoulder, gear still attached, and started trudging through the snow. Luckily, it was pretty hard snow, so I didn't sink in too much. We came up here to see the lava fields and the observatory, but it was foggy and I couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me. We passed by the observatory and didn't really see anything. Oh well. We marched through the snow for what felt like a couple of miles. It was getting late, but the hard work was keeping me warm. We crested the pass and started heading down the other side. Eventually, we got to the place where they plowed up the other side of the pass. Finally, we were back on cleared road, but it was getting dark. So we decided to press on to the town of Sisters, where we could get a motel room, dry off, and get warm. We blasted down the east side of Mackenzie Pass in the dark. It was day 15, and we got into Sisters about 10 p.m. Whew! When we got up the next morning, it was like a different world. We left a cold, wet coastal climate on the west side of the Cascades, and now we're in a warmer, drier climate on the east side of the Cascades. We rode through the Okocho National Forest, a much drier forest. Eastern Oregon is pretty dry and scrubby, and trees are few and far between. I was riding along and started feeling thirsty. I noticed a pickup truck was parked on the side of the road up ahead, and it looked like the driver was waiting for me. I wasn't sure if he was going to rob me or what. When I got close enough, he yelled, "Hey!" It kind of startled me. He said, "Hey, you want a cold beer?" Of course, I nearly locked up my brakes. In the bed of his pickup truck, he had one of those toolboxes that goes across the whole back side of the bed, okay? He opened up one side of the toolbox, and it was loaded with ice and beer. So I was like, sure, you got one for my buddy? He's coming up right behind me. And that's when Renato pulled up. There just happened to be a shade tree right there. So me and Renato sat there on the side of the road under a big old shade tree and drank the best ice-cold beer I ever had. True story. Near Dayville, we followed the John Day Valley. There was a spot there where the river cut right through the rock, exposing the John Day fossil beds, a world-class archaeological site. In the not-so-far distance, we rode past the Strawberry Mountain Wilderness area, awesome snowy peaks. We stayed in Baker City, at a school or a YMCA or something like that, I'm not sure, but we slept in the gymnasium. The next day, we were headed for the Snake River and Idaho. I remember we were flying down this big hill, and Renato was in front of me. I stopped to take a picture, and I never saw Renato again. We got separated somehow, and we never found each other. I rode hard to try to catch up to him, but I never could. Then I thought maybe I got in front of him, so I stopped and waited. Never found him. Maybe it was just one of those weird things, or maybe he dusted me on purpose. Could be I was just getting on his nerves and he wanted to ride by himself for a while. I don't know. While we were riding, we never bothered to exchange information, so I never heard from him again. To this day, it's still a mystery. So, after 11 days with a touring companion, I was on my own again. That's bike touring. I crossed the Snake River into Idaho. It was some tough climbing. It was Sunday night, so I stopped at a church service there in Cambridge, Idaho, and before I knew it, I got invited over to somebody's house. It was a super nice family. They fed me dinner, let me sleep in a warm bed, gave me breakfast, and sent me on my way the next day. I rode through New Meadows and Riggins, Idaho. I followed the Salmon River. This area was truly wild and scenic. At the end of the day, I rode into Whitebird, and I saw the infamous 12 Switchback Whitebird Hill. It looked pretty daunting, so I took a rest and then started cranking up the first switchback. There was no traffic, as all the cars took the new highway. I got into Grangeville and camped there at the city park for the night. That's where I made my mistake. I found a payphone and called home. I hadn't noticed it until then, but when I hung up the phone, I started feeling a bit lonely. This was my first bike trip far from home, and I'd been on the road for 3 weeks now, and I was starting to feel it. I was only about a 2 days ride from Missoula, so I decided that when I got to Missoula, I'd end the trip there. From Grangeville, I followed the Lochsaw River upstream. It was a gradual uphill, so it was slow going. I'll tell you, the Lochsaw River is one of the prettiest rivers I've ever seen. It was incredible. Even though I found myself in an amazing wilderness setting, I had to enjoy it alone. I made it over Lolo Pass and into Missoula. I found the bus station and boarded a bus for home. When I got home, I was met with a hero's welcome. Pretty cool. That was a great trip, and I have many fond memories. The Pacific Coast Highway, especially there near Big Sur, is one of the coolest stretches of road I've ever been on. The Redwood Forest in Northern California is also amazing. I learned a lot that summer, but the biggest lesson, that I needed more than just a 2-week vacation every year. So I think that's when I decided to become a school teacher. They say there's 3 reasons for being a teacher: June, July, and August. I needed the whole summer off, so there'd be many more adventures yet to come. So stay tuned.